gospel text today by combining three translations together to form one whole. The New Revised Standard Version, the Common English Bible, and the Message, along with a little interpretation of my own. So listen for the Word of God. Someone cried out from the crowd to Jesus, "Teacher, order my brother to give me my fair share of the family inheritance." Someone's heard that before. Jesus had a good comeback. "Friend, what makes you think it's any of my business to be a judge or mediator for you?" And then turning to the crowd, Jesus said, "Watch out. Guard against all kinds of greed, because the quality of your life is not determined by your possessions." Or said another way, life is not defined by what you have, whether a little or a lot. Or said another way, the good life does not consist in the abundance of stuff. He then illustrated his point by telling them a parable. The fields of a certain rich man produced an overly abundant crop. And he said to himself, "What should I do? My barn is not big enough for this harvest." Then he said to himself, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll gather in all my grain and goods, enough for many years. And I'll say to myself, 'Self, you've done well. Take it easy. Eat, drink, and enjoy yourself.' Just then, God showed up and said, 'Fool.' And all three translations say the word fool. Fool. Tonight you will die. Now, it's not a judgment that he'll die tonight because he's a fool, but rather it's a way to pose these questions. Tonight you will die. And that barn full of grain, what good will that be to you then? Who will get all of that?" Then in his concluding statement, Jesus said, "So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God." Or a second translation, "This is the way it will be for those who hoard things for themselves and aren't rich toward God." And that image of hoarding in that translation is powerful. But my favorite conclusion of the three, that's what happens when you fill your barn with self and not with God. Isn't that a great line? When you fill your barn with self. And we know it in this parable. The rich man speaks of himself or to himself 13 times. He said to himself, "What should I do? My barn is not big enough. Here's what I will do. I'll tear down my barns, I'll gather in my grain, and I'll say to myself, 'Self, you've done well. You've got it made. Take it easy and have the time of your life.'" So, Jesus just talked about greed, possessions, and this rich guy's self-centeredness. That's when he said to the disciples, Therefore I say to you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. There is more to life than food, and more to the body than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither plant nor harvest. They have no silo or barn, yet God feeds them. And you are worth so much more than birds. Who of you can add a single moment to your life by worrying? Or, interestingly enough, another translation of the original text, it's in the notes of your Bible. Has anyone standing before a mirror ever gotten taller by so much as 1 inch by fussing about it? Doesn't that really get to the absurdity of worrying, the point Jesus is trying to make? And he continues, if you can't do such a small thing, why worry about the rest? Notice how the lilies grow. They don't wear themselves out with work, and they don't spin cloth. But I say to you that even King Solomon in all his splendor has never looked as beautiful as If God dresses the fields so beautifully, even though they're alive today and dead tomorrow, how much more will God do for you, you people of weak faith? Don't chase after what you will eat and what you will drink. Stop worrying. All the nations of the world long for these things, and God knows you need these things. But instead, desire God's kingdom. And all these things will be given to you as well. Now, stop worrying. Boy, does Jesus know us well or what? Fretting, fussing, and stewing, and agonizing about all kinds of things. And although I get what Jesus is trying to say here, I do wish he had clarified that we still do need a job. I mean, don't we? And we can easily in that miss that he's talking about greed. He asks, how do we spend our time? What do we spend our time chasing after? Or I could be missing the point completely, because Eugene Peterson's translation of this last section, wow. What I'm trying to do here, Jesus said, is get you to relax. Not be so preoccupied with getting so you can respond to God's giving. People who don't know God and the way God works fuss over these things. But you know God and know how God works. So steep yourself in God reality, God initiative, God provisions, and you'll find that all your everyday human concerns will be met. Don't be afraid of missing out. You're my dear friends. God wants to give you the very kingdom itself. So in that one of the quotes, people who don't know God fuss over these things. I'm not sure that's quite a fair statement about people who don't believe in God. I mean, don't we all worry? I mean, I get plenty stressed out too. And yet I can really identify with this. And so did Dr. King. Martin Luther King Jr. told the story about how he grew up in the church. He's the son of a preacher, the great-grandson of a preacher, the great-great-grandson of a preacher. His only brother and his uncle were preachers. And he laughed that didn't have much of a choice but to go into the family business. But he said, though church was something very real to me, it was kind of an inherited religion. And I never felt an experience with God of my own. That changed when he moved to Montgomery to be the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Things were going well. But one day, a year later, Rosa Parks decided she wasn't going to give up her seat on the bus anymore, and the famous Montgomery bus boycott began, and Martin was asked to be its leader. You remember that he was a young pastor in his 20s when he did this. And things went smoothly for a few days. But then white people in Montgomery realized this boycott was not going to end any time soon. And among other things, they started making nasty phone calls. And he said it came to a point that some days, more than 40 calls would come in, threatening my life, threatening the life of my family, the life of my children. But he remained strong-willed. But he said he would never forget coming home from a meeting one night very late, around midnight. His wife was already sleeping. And he had another early morning meeting, so he quietly got into bed next to her. And then the phone rang. Who do you suppose it was? Who would it be today? It would be one of those send her back chanting, MAGA hat wearing, very fine people on both sides folks. That late night caller was their hooded granddaddy. He declared, we're tired of you and your mess. And if you aren't out of town in 3 days, we're going to blow your brains out and blow up your house. Which is particularly chilling this morning after El Paso. Comes from the exact same domestic terrorism of white nationalists. Dr. King said, I'd heard these things many times before, but for some reason that night really got to me. He made some coffee and sat at the kitchen table thinking about his beautiful daughter, born just a month before. He thought about his dedicated, devoted, and loyal wife sleeping in the other room, and how both could be taken from him, and how he could be taken from them. And at that moment he said, I got to the point. I couldn't take it any longer. That night he said all the theology and philosophy he had studied, all the theological and philosophical reasons for existence and the reality of sin and evil in the world had no meaning. Aristotle described God as the unmoved mover. Alfred North Whitehead described the principle of concretion. Spinoza defined God as the absolute whole. But that night such a God didn't matter. Instead, he discovered that religion had to become real to him. I had to know God for myself. And so I bowed over my cup of coffee and prayed. Lord, I'm down here trying to do the right thing. I think the cause we are representing is right, but I am weak. I'm faltering. I'm losing my courage. And if people see me weak, they'll begin to get weak. And at that moment, an inner voice said, Martin, stand up for righteousness. Stand up for justice. Stand up for truth. And lo, I will be with you even until the end of the world. And I knew in an instant I would never be alone. God would never leave me alone. And in that moment of surrender, God became more than something to believe in. I knew God as a rock in a weary land, shelter in times of storms, water when I'm thirsty, bread in a starving land. Sometimes we mainline Protestants do just as Dr. King had done. We talk about God, like Paul Tillich's ground of being, or C.S. Lewis's inconsolable longing, the signature of every soul. I mean, those are beautiful ideas, but detached. And we may try to convince people that there is a God and that all we need to do is look at the galaxy of stars or stare at the mountains to believe there is a God. And it does take faith to affirm that God exists, but does any of it really matter if God remains a distant idea instead of a present reality?
Amen.
When Trump-inspired white nationalism manifests itself in yet another act of domestic terrorism, we don't need explanations about the existence of God. I mean, we desperately need to know God. When justice is denied the Eric Garners of our world, the modern-day victims of the lynching tree, we don't need more clever ideas about God. Our hearts ache to know God. When watching the news no longer informs us, but rather frightens us and depresses us and causes us to worry, fret, stew, and agonize. When fears for our future keep surging and hopes keep disappearing, I need to know God as a rock in this weary land and shelter during this time of storms and water because I'm thirsty and bread because we are starving. That is what I need, and perhaps you might feel that way too. But not because we're looking for a way to escape. As we know, some interpretations of Christianity teach us to leave this dark and depressing world behind and claim what is ours at the pearly gates of a heaven with streets lined with gold. However, we're not looking for discharge from this world, but rather we're looking for courage in the struggle for justice and peace. And we're looking for meaning in the joy and cost of discipleship. Knowing God during this era of lives and deceptions and payoffs to porn stars means, knowing God means, we have the courage to stand up for truth and righteousness. To know God means we have the power to speak during a time of deafening silence. Right. For if we desire the kingdom of God, all these things shall be added unto you. When we feel weak, when we're faltering, when we're losing courage, if we know God, the God who stands with the downtrodden and depressed, the hopeless and the oppressed, the vulnerable and the frightened, we know that God, we don't need to worry. The rich man in the parable was declared a fool because he failed to realize he was part of a community. That like us, we all depend on each other. I mean, who do you imagine harvested all his crops in that hot sun? I mean, it surely wasn't him. And who built his barns? Well, it certainly wasn't him alone. And who sent the rain and the sun for his grain to grow? You know, it's hard to know God if we define our success by what we have, or if we are so full of self-assurance and certain that what we have is because we made it happen. I mean, that makes it really hard, difficult to know God. But let me tell you, it's not hard to know God. In fact, you already know God. If your heart sank yesterday after another act of domestic terrorism by yet another white male, and then again this morning, hearing of 9 murdered and dozens more harmed by a shooter in Dayton, Ohio, you already know God if seeing images of kids separated from their families makes you cry. If you shake your head at the cruelty of those who gleefully strip away everything from health care to food stamps and even Meals on Wheels, then you already know God. You know God every time you feel rage or the scapegoating of refugees and asylum seekers. And in all those moments, God is real to you. But also, as we await the doctor's diagnosis, sitting in our doctor's office, fearing the news, we know God. We know God intimately in our grief as we watch the life of our spouse at 60 years prepare to leave this earth. On the other hand, we also know God in the joy of a newborn tiny hands. And we know God when our heart skips a beat in the awe of the snow-peaked mountain right there in front of our face. Or over a simple cup of coffee late at night when we say, "Oh, I can't take this. I can't do this alone any longer." God is personal. God is not an idea. And like Dr. King, in all those moments, God becomes especially real when, in those personal and our national despair, we pray. Repeat after me. God, you are a rock in a weary land.
God, you are a rock in a weary land.
You are my shelter in a time of storms.
You are my shelter in a time of storms.
You are water when I'm thirsty.
You are water when I'm thirsty.
You are bread in this starving land.
You are bread in this starving